Welcome back to the Iron Sights podcast. Tonight, I've got a very good friend of mine. His name is Chris Kuras. He's in the South Florida area of the United States. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. Always a pleasure, dude.
Yeah, I'm stoked to connect with you. I always am. You've been hugely influential in so many ways for me. And so just to give a little credit where credit's due here, when I started this podcast, I was on a little journey and I was going a lot of different directions. And you were one of the very first people that ever reached out to me and actually invited me to a training. And I got to spend a couple of days with you, really get to know you. We did a very good interview there that was impactful for me and got to get into the weeds on some of the strength conditioning stuff because you have a background there. I'll have you talk about that here in a second. But you also connected me with some of now are my best friends, and that those turned into interviews, and then those relationships developed and whatnot. And it wouldn't be Iron Sights podcast, honestly, if I hadn't gotten that invite and you hadn't extended yourself to me. So I want to thank you for that, man, just publicly.
I'm going to take zero credit for that. I'm convinced you would have been successful regardless of that, but I do appreciate it.
Well, that said, I also want to just tell you how much I appreciate you staying up late with me. We're recording this kind of late on your end. We're on Pacific Standard, you're Eastern Standard, and that means a lot to me. Just that you take time out of your day away from the wife and the fur kids, the fur babies, to spend some time with me tonight. I have lots of questions.
Yeah, shockingly, they're actually all sleeping quietly, so this is perfect.
All right, good. Well, I have lots of questions for you. This podcast is going to be directed at law enforcement and the fitness aspect and how that all applies and doesn't apply. We recently were on a podcast with Eric Tung from Blue Grit Wellness, has Blue Grit Radio, is an awesome podcast, and he hosted the two of us where we got into a little deeper discussion about fitness in police culture, and we were able to talk about some things. And I kind of felt I gotta be honest, because I nerd out on this stuff. I walked away from that podcast enjoying it. It sparked a lot of conversation online and offline, which then inspired me to I got to reach back out to Chris. We got to kind of pick up where we left off and maybe handle some specifics, specific topics, and maybe recover a couple, and hopefully help some people, maybe give them a little bit better direction on maybe how to implement this stuff. Obviously identify some of the roadblocks, maybe how to get around them a little bit. But based on your background, which I'll have you talk about here in a second, and give us, just kind of a rundown. You're one of those guys that I know I can have this conversation with. There doesn't need to be a lot of preparation for it. This is what you do. This is who you are. It's woven into your fabric. So I'm excited to kind of go down the road here and kind of open up a couple of topics, maybe even dive into a few rabbit holes, but at the same time, keeping it focused. So maybe just for those of you who don't know you or haven't come across you yet, talk a little bit about yourself and where you come from and how you got to where you're at.
Okay. Obviously, Chris Kuras. I live in South Florida, where I'm active duty law enforcement. Prior to getting into law enforcement, I had the distinct privilege and pleasure of being a Division I strength coach at the University of Central Florida for just over 5 years, working under Coach Ed Ellis and Scott Sinclair, who is currently at University of Georgia. So go Georgia. Actually, I think they play this weekend. After the 5 years, I had an itch that I really needed to scratch. I love being a strength coach and love being involved in college sports, but I'd always wanted to be either first responder or military. And the stars aligned. One of the first places I applied took me. Shortly after, I was able to get on my SWAT team. And through a lot of persistence, I've been lucky and, again, privileged to be in the current position of in our training unit and a training cadre for our SWAT team, and basically helping with all the high liability trainings for my entire agency, which includes officer wellness and the workout programs and designing our new weight room and things like that. So all the things I'm passionate about, I get paid to do and handle on a daily basis. So my life is awesome right now. I really have zero complaints.
What are you doing outside? I know there's some stuff you do outside there too. You've got a quote unquote side gig. I'd say it's more than that though. It's a full blown business. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So Early on in my career, I started an Instagram page that was Tactical Human Performance, which my goal was to actually offer workout programs for military and first responders, and kind of realized a lot of cops weren't really motivated. So it ended up turning into keeping the name, but turning it into performance with shooting tactics and training, stuff like that. And January, coming up in 25, I'm launching a new products company called Good Dude Concepts. Actually, I'll bring you a hat to SHOT Show because there's these that showed up a couple days ago. We'll talk more about that offline. But I've got some new products that are patent pending that I think are going to be game changers for first responders and citizens across like a whole plethora of, I would say, demographics that I think everyone's going to be pretty excited about. And the price points are going to be super aggressive. Even with my training and my products, I don't plan on pricing anything to the point where I'm not trying to get rich. I'm trying to solve problems in efficient ways. Like I'm lucky enough to have a really good job. Like I just said, I get paid to hang out with my friends and do what I love. So if I can supplement a little bit of income or even donate things to law enforcement, like time, energy, stuff like that, I'll be happy to do it. It's not something I'm trying to change the world on as far as money.
I think people that know you, that are listening to you, and by the way, going back to distinct privileges, you mentioned the coaches that you work with and the opportunities that you had there. I don't know, maybe consider this one too. I think you hold the second place spot. We may have to fix that, but the second place spot on multiple appearances on the Ironsides podcast. This is actually your third time.
That's true.
Because we've again, outside of the invitation I got, we also were able to connect out in Virginia Beach when Performance First. Jeff Nichols, his wife Catherine, ran a 3-day summit there where we got to nerd out and just be students, but also participate in some pretty cool stuff. And we were able to sit down and talk then too. So I encourage people to go back and find those episodes and listen to them. They're good, but the anybody that knows you, I think that's heard you before, maybe it's been here, maybe it's been on a live or another podcast, knows you to be that guy you just described, man, that's just always looking for a way to solve a problem. And the way to do that starts with really having your finger on the pulse of what the problems are. And I don't want to take a deep dive on all the problems that exist specifically to the disconnect that exists between fitness and law enforcement and all the different hierarchical places where these things happen. We've kind of talked about that ad nauseum, but I think it's important that we kind of cover a few and just kind of really, I guess, identify the realities of what exists out there, what officers are faced with, what agencies are faced with, what our citizens are faced with as it relates to officer health and wellness. And again, you're the dude to talk to about that. So in doing so, again, going back to some of these conversations that I've had, like on a public platform like this, or maybe it's been through Instagram and comments, and then it turns into DMs, and it's turned into a lot of phone call conversations with a lot of officers that I'm friends with, kind of all over the country, who have really, I guess, they're very adamant about having fit, well put together, squared away. And when I say fit, I mean emotionally, psychologically, and physically fit officers on their agency and their department. And they're constantly facing this frustration of this large population that just doesn't seem to care. And you mentioned the word motivation, or not motivated to do it. I think that's part of it, but there seems to be some other things underneath there that are limiting, I guess, the information maybe getting out there and why this is important. And I'd like to maybe get your opinion on why it isn't important and how does this happen? Because at some point in an officer's career, actually in every officer's career, it is important at one point, and then it's never important again to a lot of people. And that starts at the academy. Right. And when you go through there, for the physical fitness piece is a big part of it. So again, the question in that is like, what happens? Like what happened to it after that? And why is it the way it is right now?
So in the academy, you're fighting for a job and a career path. Like most agencies, once you get hired, they start paying you immediately. They give you an academy start date, and you start getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. The only way you screw that up is if you don't make probation, you don't pass your physical test or your written test, your shooting, driving, all the high liability stuff. You have to pass all these qualification processes and then pass, obviously, probation, the FTO process. But once you pass FTO, you're basically like, you get the blessing and you're under the protection of usually law enforcement, or most agencies have unions, whether it's FOP or PBA, stuff like that. And as much as I appreciate our unions, they are a blessing and a curse, because you can literally do some stupid things that could embarrass your family and your agency, and the FOP will find a way for you to keep your job. Some people don't deserve it. So saying all that to get to the point of what's the incentive? You can't fire me. I can be, if I want to right now, I'm going to go eat a bunch of chocolate covered pretzels and drink Gatorade at 10 o'clock at night, or drink a bunch of beer. And I wake up 2 or 3 pounds heavier every day for the next 30 days. And I get fat and out of shape. And guess what? There's nothing you can do about it at this agency. As long as I qualify with my gun and I show up to work on time and I don't do anything egregious, I get to keep my job. So what is the motivation coming from the organization? Like, there isn't any. I get to keep my job. I still get my paycheck, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what it is for most agencies. So it's a subjective little gray area where they try to find a way to motivate people. But in reality, unless it's in their contract that they have with their cities, like, hey, you have to pass a PT test, or there's some type of carrot of incentive, why? Like, why? Well, I don't have to do shit. And most agencies don't care to, and they just let the culture kind of breed out of control unless somebody tries to get ahead of it. And like we talked about in the other podcast, you have to find the spark somewhere. And then before you know it, you build that momentum. But the reality is, if you don't have the motivation, it's not going to come from the outside, most likely, as far as your agencies or your city organization will provide you, I should say.
So what I take away from that as I'm listening to it is, I'm not surprised by what you said. I've heard it before. You've said it to me before. I've heard other people say it. But you nailed a couple of things there, which was like the motivational factor, and you hit some very extrinsic, measurable, objective things that officers have to hit while they're in the academy in order to qualify to have the job, right? And then go on to do the things that they do. And you mentioned some things. You mentioned the high liability things. So there's fitness involved in that. There's fighting involved in that. There's shooting involved in that. There's driving involved in that. I mean, the things that you already said you're involved in at the training unit in terms of training. And at that point, there's a high level of value placed on that, because you either can or you can't, which means you either move forward or you don't. So I already know the answer to this question from you, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I was not shocked, but kind of taken back a little bit, I guess, when in some of these conversations I've had, but and kind of the answers I was getting back, and they were kind of polling people and asking certain questions. But the question is this: is it reasonable to have a standard for officers that they should have to maintain once they exit the academy as it relates to fitness? Again, we have those other measurable things we talked about. I don't want to get into that today, because this is an entirely different rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah.
But and you hear that talked about all the time, specific to shooting and fighting and things like that, BJJ, or all those kind of things. But is it reasonable to have a standard for somebody to have to maintain through the entirety of their career? I don't want to talk about making adjustments to it or anything like that. Just, is it reasonable?
Simply, yes, in my opinion. Based on my experience, where I work, the simple fact is, an officer in our agency, if they have worked there, I believe it's 10 years as our top out, we're making over 6 figures as cops. Like, I know in California, it's expensive as shit to live out in California, but guys are probably making like 150. Like, that's insane to me. When we get some of our contracts, I'm like, you're going to pay me what to hang out with my friends and do what I love? Okay, cool. But I guess the exception to the rule. Most people aren't like that. Saying that to get to like, you're getting paid a lot of money, and most people like to use the phrase, "We're getting paid for what we might have to do." Nobody I've ever met has this illusion in their head like you're just gonna basically live a firefighter's life, like get cats out of trees and like hang out in the park all day. Like that's not what people sign up for law enforcement to do. They know they're getting hired to deal with people's problems and be a problem solver for their community and protect the people who deserve or need to be protected from the evil, bad people in this world. Like there's usually no confusion about that. I've yet to find somebody who's like, oh, I'm super confused about it. So the fact that everyone knows what they're getting into, and then there's somehow becomes a disconnect of, oh, I may have to get into a 2 or 3 minute fight with somebody, or I may have to draw my weapon and use it against somebody. I don't know, because that's probably pretty subjective individually.
Yep.
But I want to say the majority of people always come in the first couple of years and they have that motivation, and then life will probably get in the way, and then it just kind of fades away for most of them, depending on where they want to go in their careers or what their home life is like, because that's a big factor too.
Okay, fair enough.
So
yeah, fair enough on the home life thing too. Obviously, there's liabilities outside of being a law enforcement officer, and things catch up. Again, going back, so again, is it reasonable to have an objective standard? Obviously, my answer is going to be yes. I think there is. I think where you're going at is like what are the roadblocks there? In terms of maintaining that. And you mentioned things like unions. You mentioned things like motivation. You mentioned things like extrinsic things that impact an officer's life that may be taking away from the time that he's putting into himself, as opposed to putting into the job and also trying to put into his family or her family. And how those things impact and collide with one another. So going back to the academy, and you mentioned like kind of what the motivators are, I think there's some other ones there too that could be carried over regardless of whether there's an objective standard there or not. And that comes from kind of the social end of things. And part of that, I guess where I'm going with that is there's another thing that I would assume. I have zero law enforcement experience. I have zero military experience. I only have my own experiences, but I'll give you kind of an example of a story that somebody from inside the military told me, and has been pretty popular in telling in a second here. But there is a social dynamic that's happening in the academy as well that somehow seems to get lost once they're out of that situation and get into the one that you just described a couple years down the line or whatever. And that is, if you're the worst at physical fitness, I mean, how are we rewarding people? How are we propping people up? Who is becoming the team leader within the academy? It's not the most unfit dude, right? That's doing that. Like, that is valued, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, if I'm wrong about that.
No, 100% correct.
So, and at the same time, so everybody knows who that person is, that most fit person is, or who's the fastest runner, right? That's really easily measurable, right? Like you run in every freaking day, right? So, who's crossing the finish line last and who the rabbit is every time, and people know. And some people love that guy and aspire to be like that guy or gal, whatever. And there's other people that don't care. But what they definitely don't want to be is the last person over the line every time, because everybody knows who that person is too. And then there's everybody in between. And so how you place yourself from a mindset perspective, I guess, in the middle of that is, again, that's an individual thing. Like, where do I want to be? I just don't want to be last. Okay, well, being second to last is better than last, but you're still a turd, right? As it compares to, the people that are finishing out front. You're only as good as that worst person isn't, right? Kind of thing. And so you start to develop this social currency within that structure. And obviously, and everybody kind of knows, you might not know what the test score is that your buddy got, but people are sharing that, right? And they're sharing their anxieties about passing a test, like an academic type test. And I think, maybe in that environment, you would also kind of know who the better shooters are. You're certainly you're going to know who the better drivers are. You're going to know who the better fighters are, because That's what you're seeing every day, and that's what's being measured, and that's ultimately what's being valued. And that, again, gets lost somewhere down the line. In terms of carrying over that social currency, like, why can't that be carried over beyond the academy, and how does it get upheld? And I think part of it is, for me, going back to the story, there's a guy by the name of Matt Larson. I don't know if you heard of this dude.
The name sounds familiar.
He's head of the SOCP program. He was kind of the author of the SOCP program for the U.S. Army. He's out at West Point now and runs the combatives program there, but he started there in Fort Benning and kind of putting the combatives program together for the Army. Gotcha. And he tells a story of how this particular entourage of folks came in from the Marine Corps and were kind of, walking into his building, and he was kind of, I guess, introducing them to what was then a very new program. And he asked some questions because you had this high-ranking official, right, within the Marine Corps branch, and then he had all his people with him. And he asked for a show of hands. He goes, like, who's the best runner in this group? And everybody's go, oh, it's, I think he describes it as like Major Longlegs, over there. That dude's the best runner. A guy just like won the Marine Corps marathon, right? And everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows what that is. And then the next question is, well, who's the best fighter in here? And there's crickets. Nobody knows. Who's the best shooter in here? Nobody knows. And his point is like, that's a problem to me, because what that tells me is this institution, this organization, values running over fighting and shooting, which, when you're looking at what we're supposed to be doing here, those things are equally as important. The only time you're running should be towards the enemy, right? In this case, if we're bridging the gap to law enforcement, like, should be running towards whatever the threat is or the incident is or whatever we're talking about here. And when you get there, in his words, and I'm paraphrasing here, with every step you get closer, the fighting and the shooting gets that much more important. Yet, so going back and like, how do they? Why is running so valued in that particular environment? Is because every day you run, right? And so every day you know who the best runner is, who the worst runner is, and it's very obvious. And nobody wants to be around or touch the guy or the person that's last at everything, because that's not the guy you want standing next to you when the fitness, the fighting, the shooting, and again, in this case, the driving and everything else actually shows up. So there's this social currency being developed in that environment too, and it gets lost when they go out into the quote unquote mainstream of their agency or their department. I guess my point in telling the story, or paraphrasing Matt's story, is, where are we placing value, and where does it get lost? And where does it get started, but then how does it get lost? Because everybody knows what that is at some point and then forgets about it. So I think about like the objective stuff and then the subjective stuff with this. And again, it blows my mind, when I hear that, a chief, when asked, what do we really value here and how are we measuring that, goes straight to the answer of, well, crime rate's down, and and officer safety is better. However we're measuring those things, we had less officers get in incidents. We had, less officers hurt. We had, crime rates are down. We all know those numbers can look very, very different based on however they want to provide statistics. But at no point are we ever talking about fitness, right? Like, and how do we evaluate that? Going back to the shooting stuff, like, I don't know how it works in the academy in shedding some light on this, but in your training unit, how do you know who the best shooter is? Like, when they come out to train with you?
Oh, we score. And we started, the past probably 2 years, we started using hit factor scoring on things.
Okay, so that in and of itself is very much different than a lot of agencies work, right?
Yeah,
hit factor scoring.
Like the qualification is a joke. Like I literally have a personally owned Glock 17 with an NYPD trigger and no sights on the gun, and I was able to pass our qual. Like Helen Keller can pass a state qual from any probably state in the United States. So there's measurables and like little competitions we do during in-service training. Okay. And we're currently pushing for not a like the incentive of maybe somebody gets like an expert badge for their Class A uniform and maybe like an extra day off or something like that. But bosses always like measurable things for data, like you said, crime rates and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. What I find interesting, I was bouncing around some ideas and some stuff you said, like what changes from academy to after the academy. And I've been diving into psychology a lot recently. Like why does my brain think certain ways and why do other people's brains? Like where do they come to these solutions? And the first thing that came into my head is I remember going through the academy, and it's probably like that for most selection processes, whether it's a SWAT school or academy process, is not only are you trying to be motivated by instructors, your classmates want you to succeed too. So that's part of the process of like building up a class. Like you break them down, build them up. It's just like any boot camp or anything like that. Like there's planned failure. Oh, you guys all suck. Clean up, and you have to run and do burpees and push-ups and everything. And you start to have this like trauma bonding type of thing. And the person who is in last, whoever finished the run first, usually runs to the back of the line and tries to motivate. Hey, let's go, buddy, pushing their back and stuff like that. It happened during my SWAT school. Like I literally had my now teammates like pushing my back because I fucking hate running. It was it was after like 6 or however many miles we did that day. It was a long day of running. But needless to say, like they came back to get me, and it was motivating. And I was like, yes, I'm not going to let my teammates down. And you find another gear, and you find a way to power through it. Once you graduate, the way our academies work is it's a multi-agency academy. So anybody can come and go from multiple agencies and stuff like that. Maybe in the future we'll have our own in-house. But there's nobody holding you accountable anymore. There's nobody saying, hey, come on, buddy, let's go work out, because you're now a new rookie in a place where, like, luckily our training unit, we still take them to go work out. But once they start FTO, we're pretty hands off. Like we don't have any more real influence on them until they come back for in-service training, or unless they're having an issue that needs to be addressed training wise. But when it comes to like fitness, like, well, go do great things. We kind of just let them go. And that's every agency I've ever heard of. Very few, I would say, ever come back and like, hey, I'd like a workout program. I've gotten that question maybe a dozen times over the past 10 years. Wow. Because I'll offer like, hey, what do you want help with? You're struggling with pull-ups? Here's a good program. Here's whatever you need. But I want to say it's like that with pretty much everything in law enforcement. Like you're taught you're taught to meet a certain standard of whatever the state requires, whether it's qualifications or the agency's policies. You pass those standards, and then, all right, big boy rules now. Just don't fuck up and you'll be okay. So the only way to really fix that, I would say, is maybe the culture. In certain things, what's worked for our agency is the culture. So like I said, we're mixing in a bunch of practical competition style shooting things. And now we've got more guys than ever going to competitions and like doing stuff like that. And it's fun. Guys are enjoying it. You can do things like that in all realms of law enforcement. Like, hey, like our combatives program has grown exponentially, like far beyond anything I've ever seen. Of like, guys are all trying to get blue belts and keep going and going and going. Like one of my best friends, Drew, I think he's now a blue belt. He recently got a couple months ago. Like he had never done jiu-jitsu ever, really. He's a Navy guy. Was a good cop. He loves chasing bad guys, and he got bit by the bug, and now he does jiu-jitsu like 4 or 5 days a week. And he loves jiu-jitsu and just keeps doing it. And now he's like one of our combatives instructors. And all it took was getting the right motivation and us just building this curriculum. And we've got more people that are blue belts now than ever before in the agency. But it was that little cultural bug, a little bit of social peer pressure, or not. I wouldn't say peer pressure, just pure motivation, maybe. Stuff like that. And it can, again, be multifaceted in multiple ways. But once they like cut that umbilical cord after the academy, it's kind of on you. Majority of agencies don't offer the resources that I would say we've learned to accommodate, because we weren't always this way. Like I said, I've been in my agency over 10 years now. This combatives program didn't exist. the PT program and on-duty workout time that we talked about in the other podcast didn't exist. But over the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years has been a very aggressive progression and evolution for these good things. But I fear we might be the anomaly, and it's not, excuse me, becoming a I don't know, widespread practice, which I'm glad we're on the forefront of maybe the evolution. But like we talked about in the intro, like how do we help others find these resources? How do we help others build those cultures and maybe lay a blueprint or a roadmap to make the whole profession better, which is a pipe dream and wishful thinking. But as you know, it's problems I'm always trying to solve, which drives me a little insane sometimes.
Yeah, it does. Again, I've had a lot of conversations, and they're literally going insane, trying to figure this out, and that moves into frustration and being bitter and pointing fingers sometimes and being mad at people. But you said a couple things there. One was you said social or peer motivation versus peer pressure. And going back to kind of the academy and as they're transitioning out and how they're kind of let go to big boy rules, a lot of this is learned through experience, right? So the education that they're getting is through the experience that they're getting, not necessarily being backed up with any kind of legit education as to what they're doing, more importantly, why they're doing it. And obviously that gets that's a big undertaking to educate somebody on anything. But you brought up, if we're comparing like fitness and shooting, or bringing up the hit factor scoring, like that becomes very objective, very, very quickly. And people start to learn like why the fundamentals of the things that they experienced and were taught that got them to the minimum standard of qualification, how they now translate over to being able to actually tell, how am I actually doing, going back to the minimal standard that exists in a lot of these shooting qualifications. So then you now have a platform to talk about, well, here's how you can get better. Here's the things that you're missing, and you can teach them how to train. Like, here's how you get to do this better. It doesn't mean you need to be out on the range 4 days a week, 3 days a week, or whatever. There's dry fire practice. There's things you can be doing, right? You're giving them some education beyond the experience that they got. So they're not just showing up and going, okay, cool, I got another experience today, and I learned that I suck, or I learned that I'm probably average, or I learned that I'm really good here, and then walking away with that. Because what do you do with that? Like, all you've walked away with is like, again, a very subjective, like, I'm better than the other guys, right? And propping them up. So you're talking about like, we score it. And it's public, like you can see. We go through everybody's scores or whatever, and it's there. Everybody knows who the better shooter was for today, on that given day. So again, going back to like the fitness piece, if I'm asking somebody, or if I ask the question, is it reasonable to have an objective standard on the fitness end? Then, to your point, I want to ask a couple more questions about this. Is it reasonable then to expect that the agency, the institution as a whole, should be providing some resource beyond the experience and the minimum standard in order to get them to be better? And so you were talking about all the things that your agency does, and you specifically like the combatives program and how it's evolved so rapidly and aggressively. I wonder how that happened, because I think people listening to the show probably want to know, like, okay, well, how did you do that? Like, where did that start, and how did it kind of take off as wildly as it has?
If I remember correctly, for the combatives program, it was a handful of, I want to say they were either purple, brown, and black belts. They were high level guys. Got together with the head of the training unit at the time. Was like, hey, we want to offer they were all instructors at their schools wherever they trained.
Gotcha.
We want to offer this, and it worked its way through the chain of command, and I forget how they got approval for it, but eventually it became a thing. And I want to say it started out as like 3 days a week, and that turned into 5 days a week, and that turned into multiple during different shifts, like so midnights and day shifts, and every shift had the opportunity to go multiple times a week. Which stinks, because right now we're kind of in limbo because our new headquarters is under construction and we don't really have a place to train. So we're always like a homeless family right now, trying to figure out where to go.
Find some garage somewhere.
Yeah, but what's really cool about law enforcement as a profession is Well, everybody had a life before law enforcement. Very few people, I've only met maybe a handful that were like, all right, I went from high school straight to law enforcement, or I went from college straight to law enforcement. There's some middle ground. Like some of the guys in my unit, like one of my teammates, he was like an amateur pro golfer. Another guy worked on cruise ships. Another guy, he just sold insurance or something, or was it like one of our guys that's a president of our union used to be on the New York Stock Exchange as a financial advisor. Like everybody has a story from somewhere. So what happens when it comes to financial stuff? I call my guy, whose name is also Scott, and I'm like, hey, where should I invest my money? You know more than me. I promise you, at some agency, somebody was a personal trainer, or their brother might be a physical therapist, or there's so many resources that you probably don't even realize that you have that are low hanging fruit. Should the agency provide it? Yes. I guarantee most agencies, if they would inquire, whoever provides their insurance, if they have a certain number of members or employees, I know there's a couple agencies around here. Their insurance company provides them either a physical therapist or a wellness coach trainer that is either on staff, available like from 9 to 5, several days a week, or there's virtual coaching available. There's some form of resource that it's free because you're getting money that's coming out of their paychecks to pay for their insurance and the whole economic process of that. Another thing that people probably don't realize is there's a lot of gyms. There's gyms all over the place. Like I'm not a huge CrossFit guy, but I guarantee you there's either CrossFit gym or personal training gym. I wouldn't say maybe your LA Fitnesses or your UFits or whatever you want to call them may not be open to this. But if you find a good coach somewhere and you say, hey, would you be willing to come to my agency and do a talk for 30 minutes? And you may get a couple eye rolls and just come talk at briefing, offer your services. Because I've met those people and multiple times like, hey, I want to come train cops and I'll even do it for free. I'll give them a free 3 months or a free month of whatever. There you go. Exactly.
I can't tell you how many times I've done that. You know how many times I've been taken up on that offer?
Probably zero.
0 times.
Look at Jeff Nichols, one of the best strength coaches for the tactical community on the planet, who offers free coach. Who I don't know if he still does, but how many times for months, probably over a year, he offered free coaching to any cop in the Virginia Beach area, and he got maybe like 5 people over the course of over a year. So you will get some people who are going to roll their eyes. You may not reach those people, but it could be the genesis and spark something for somebody. The resources don't always have to be super shiny and crazy, because most of these gym owners, it's a marketing opportunity. They're probably offering the help because they're passionate and they care about law enforcement, first responders. So it's a way for them to give back. And they are so passionate about what they do, they just probably want to help give information or help prevent injury. Like there's a reason why people get into strength and conditioning and wanting to be coaches. Like there's a mentoring, like educational process. You're like a hybrid of like a mentor, a teacher, a coach, and like all of these things put together. And you truly just want to usually help people, which is probably how I ended up in law enforcement from my previous career. But there's so many options that I think people maybe not even realize are available, or they are afraid to reach out to. Like most cops are really good communicators. Send an email, or I guarantee you, drive around your city during your downtime. If your city's not crazy, like on fire 24/7, like drive around and walk into a gym. Like, hey, I'm Bob. Like, what's this place about? See what they're willing to do. Like, how much do you care about helping solve the problem? Because cops are the best and worst at this. Like, there's a saying that we hate change in the way things are. So there's no way to make us happy, but we do love to bitch about everything. They want to be car to car with their buddy and just bitch about whatever the hot topic is, instead of, okay, here's the thing that's the problem. Where is the potential solution? And what can I do to fix it? Yes, you may beat your head against the wall for several months or years, but you never know. You may be the catalyst that changes everything in the right direction. Who the hell knows? Like, it's a valiant effort regardless.
Yeah, it's kind of that you got to be the change type of saying. I wonder, going back to the combatives guys that started this thing and put in the effort and the energy, And I mean, this could matter to some, it might not matter to others. Going back to what you were just saying about wanting to give back and just be a part of the solution.
Mhm.
Were these guys demanding payment to do this kind of thing?
Nope.
Right. Okay.
Nope.
So that the answers.
I want to say their chain of command, because some of them were just on patrol, some of them were in special units. They got taken care of. So if they came in an hour early, they made sure that they were able to leave an hour early as well, type of thing. They made sure it didn't impact their life in any negative way by doing something that benefited the agency.
Right. So it's a net positive thing without a huge a financial transaction that gets messy.
Yes, and they made it. Anybody who wanted to attend, they made sure that it was a smooth process for them as well. Make sure they get time to shower, put their uniform on, and look good. And it ended up being, I think, about a 45 or 50-minute training session with 10 to 15 minutes like shower, make sure uniform looks good. You don't have to go to briefing. If there's something you needed to know in briefing, your boss would have probably called you or told you about it already, or you probably got 6 emails about it. But that's the example that we're trying to do. And like shooting, I think one of the guys on my team got permission for us to start our own sponsored shooting team that the FOP and the agency are going to start paying for guys to go shoot competitions. And they'll be provided not officially, but be provided at least the ammo to go to competitions, which saves money with 15 to 20 cents a round. It adds up. So more incentive, more carrots than sticks at the end of the day.
What a great recruiting opportunity too.
I just had that conversation with our new background sergeant yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, why not go to where people are wanting to compete and wanting to shoot better and may be interested in it, and have a great example of other people out there doing the same with a jersey on or whatever that says X agency, and you get to start those conversations. Again, that's the solutions-based process to kind of finding things. So I wonder, going back to the participants, you mentioned there was a benefit there of some accommodations being made, right? And my agency is supporting me in, look, there's a lot of things we have to do as officers on a daily basis. You mentioned things like briefing, obviously just kitting up, suiting up, ready to go. Like, we have to maybe make some accommodations, 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there. That is not an impossible task.
No.
Right? That is just working through, like, what is a reasonable expectation in terms of making that accommodation. So one of the things I heard you say on that other interview I did with you, or that we were both on together, was I think a little bit specific, like your agency actually provides time for officers to, and maybe this is a specific instance, I don't know, to get in and get things done, or get a workout in, to be specific, to get a workout in before or after their shift. There's an accommodation being made there. I know of another agency that I've got sort of some intimate knowledge of, from experience and from friends that I know that are inside there, that have just instituted what they call a power hour. Right, where it's like, hey, you get time to do this. So there is an opportunity to do that, and that's inside your working hours. And we've made accommodations there. Now, anytime you do that, like if you're pulling somebody off a shift for an hour, it's not that you just can add more time on. That means we have to make accommodations somewhere down the line. And yeah, that's work. But if organized and you're going at it the right way, I feel like it's a reasonable expectation that I'm being given an extra hour to work out, then I'm going to have to come to the table with being okay with the accommodation, whatever that is. And maybe that means, again, like I'm going in 3 days a week, means I got to hustle, means I got to meal prep because I'm not going to have time to dick around with any of that stuff. Like, because we're managing payroll, which is going to be important to the brass, and it's going to be important to the city, right, on that end. But it's not an impossible task. And again, so going back to like power hours and stuff, my understanding is that your agency also provides that for officers to get into some type of a fitness or training program, whether that's shooting, whether it's combatives, whether it's fitness or whatnot, correct?
For combatives and physical training, yes. So once we open our new headquarters, I'm going to be pushing for the on-duty firearms training. So if you want to take that, so currently we have they call it the wellness hour. So you get 1 hour on three separate occasions every work week. So everybody gets their 40 hours. Most of patrol works 4 10-hour shifts. So on 3 separate days, you get 1 hour, and it can be to go to the combatives training or just go to the gym at the station. And has to be coordinated with your sergeant who's running your district to make sure that, all right, not the entire shift is going to work out at the same time.
Right.
You have to obviously make sure there's coverage and stuff like that. But like anything else, communicate with your bosses, and it always gets worked out. Most of our bosses are pretty good about that stuff, and they're motivated to help the guys because it's a way to decompress. You get to not be humping calls for an hour. You get to relax a little bit and take the earpiece out or turn the radio down a little bit. So that's at least the plan going forward. Once we do have a range, yes, hey, we've got plenty of ammo. Hey, if you want to come do drills for a little bit, we'll be able to accommodate that. Right now, again, we're a little bit homeless and it's a little frustrating.
Yeah,
but
gotcha.
Moving in the right direction for sure.
So I guess the point of that is accommodations can be made to get people to do this. So the next question would be, I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but what percentage of officers at the agency take advantage of the things that have been provided to them in that way?
I would say probably, speaking of patrol, because when we had our old headquarters and I was able to see it more often, I would say at least half. Right now,
really,
the gym was usually pretty busy, and the combatives classes were pretty full. We had to move out of our headquarters and into a corporate office building temporarily, which means we lost our gym, and we have a makeshift gym at a substation now, and all other kinds of weird middle ground accommodations that we're making work. It's not the best, but I want to say it was a pretty lucrative program. Our old gym was not very big, maybe, I don't know, 800 square feet. It was tiny.
Wow.
It was tiny. It was basically two normal office rooms spliced together. And it would be pretty busy in there. There'd be at least 6 to 12 people in there on a regular random hour as you just walk by the briefing room, which is where it was. So, and the combatives classes, again, they picked up a lot of momentum and a lot of people liked it. Even, we're even offering it to civilians, non-sworn people were inquiring they wanted to go. We had...
Oh, you mean employees, but unsworn employees?
Yeah, just regular civilians. And we also... we call them service aides at my agency, or civilian aides. Every agency calls them something different, but they handle priority calls of crashes and hit and run, stuff like that.
It's great.
Even they wanted to participate in it because they saw it as self-defense. So actually, I think they have a class tomorrow. So again, there's people who are motivated that if you're not even offering it to them, they don't get the chance to even take advantage of the resource. So what's the harm in presenting to your chain of command, hey, let's have a trial program. If it doesn't work out, I'll go fuck myself. Okay, I tried. But what happens if, again, that is the catalyst to a huge successful program, especially when it comes to combatives and fitness? That means injuries usually go down. Use of force is handled completely different. I want to say it's unanimous across the country. Good combatives programs that are really, really aggressive, not in the tactics, but in pushing a good curriculum to their officers, you see uses of force drop all the time, and officer injury rates drop. And I want to say NTOA or a couple organizations did studies on this to show it really does pay off. And then also, if you're not injured, because light duty is where every officer really probably contemplates terrible things in their head because it's awful being injured and not being able to do your job. So I'm healthy. I don't have to worry about being injured. My bosses are happy. My health insurance is probably going to go down. It saves me money. The incentives are all over the place. But all it takes is one person with the idea to follow through with it. And I know it, trust me, I know firsthand, getting something approved up a chain of command can be a very troublesome, frustrating process. But you never know. One example, I never thought, and this is completely unrelated to fitness, but the fact that it's happening just makes me giddy. We just ordered, or we're finishing the process of ordering 400 rifles. All the rifles actually came in, but every single rifle at our agency is going to be suppressed with a red dot, with a surefire flashlight, with a fancy sling. And every gun is a Cobalt Kinetics 11.5. Like
Nice.
it's a like $3,500 setup. And there's only maybe that I know of 25 to maybe 35 or 40 agencies in the country where every single rifle is suppressed. Like that's never been a thing. But what did it do? It was low hanging fruit. The chief saw it. It's protecting their hearing, and it's making the troops happy. Like when that project got announced, morale skyrocketed. Everybody,
Right.
my phone doesn't stop ringing. Hey, when the suppressors come? When the suppressors come? Well, annoying, but I'm so happy that it's a thing because all it took was me being annoying about it for a couple months, years. Be like, hey, this is a thing. We should consider it. We have a forward thinking chief who's like, you know what? You're right. Our officers deserve this. How do we make this happen? And we start navigating the process. But you have to be a squeaky wheel. Just like, I don't know, don't quit, don't give up, because you never know. Like it could lead to something fun and awesome. And you made the place better. Or what's the saying? Leave it better than you found it. Like that's my whole goal, at least. And I hope other officers can have that same motivation. At some point, we're all going to be dead. Like the train's going to keep on moving. I'm going to retire. My team and my agency is going to forget about me probably 2 minutes after I leave the building. But did I do anything to make it better for the next generation of officers? I can at least confidently say, yes, I gave it my best effort. And yes, it frustrated the hell out of me sometimes, but it got my best effort. And I think I did a good job when I leave. After that, whatever. I'm going into retirement. I don't give a shit. But if you don't have people like that, you're going to never evolve. You're always going to have the same problems. Morale's always going to be low. There's always going to be the same problems over and over and over again.
So it's interesting. There's a couple things that really come up for me in that. First off, when you said 50%, kind of blew me away. Like that's outstanding, right? That's I'm sure people are hearing that on the other end. They're hearing a lot of things right now, and hearing 50%, like really, dude, like really, and because they're faced with such a different situation, right? Whatever that is, financial. We don't get cool gear.
Don't quote me on it, but our patrol staff is around
I get it.
a little over 200. So I want to say, yeah, they're all doing, I would say close to half is doing something with that hour.
So with that, again, going back to like the motivation factor, it's in there somewhere, right? And people are taking advantage of it for whatever the reasons there are. And what I never heard you say in any of that was that they were doing it because they were going to be tested on any of that. Like they're not going to combatives because they're going to be tested. The guy's not, the guy that you said was never done any BJJ before, who's now just been bitten by the bug and he's getting after it now. He's not doing that because he has to pass a test. That, the people that the 50% of officers that are using the gym facility that's there, even in this, interim period while you're having this next facility being built and everything else, they're not going because they're being tested on their fitness. We already established that. They're doing that for other reasons. And those are the reasons I want to get to the bottom of, because why? Like, what is the difference between there and so many other places? I mean, I don't know if you can answer that or not, but that's why, like, why is it this way there?
I love. This is the types of questions that I actually love, because again, it's intriguing to me in the psychology of stuff like that. Like, what makes us tick? What is the factor? And I might start walking around asking these questions. To give you a hypothesis type answer, I would say it's the culture of a little bit like we talked about earlier, but not social peer pressure, but it's quality of material and quality of the culture of the way my brain worked. When I first got hired, I remember walking through the hallways and seeing a group of SWAT guys, and they were all big, muscular as hell, covered in tattoos, big old beards. And I was just like, that's what I want to be like. And most of those guys ended up being firearms instructors. So when I went through my post academy training before I started FTO, like they were all awesome shooters. I was like, all right, so what do I need to do? I need to stay big and strong and make sure I can shoot and be athletic and all those kinds of things. Like, that's the culture that the agency had 10 years ago. Okay. I want to say it's gradually gotten better because we've been, again, trying to evolve and pushing all the evolution in the right areas. But we've been really lucky to have, again, round pegs and round holes. These combatives guys, one of them is, his name's Raphael. He's been a black belt for, I don't know, 2 decades plus. He got hired, I want to say, either around the age of 40. If I remember correctly, and I don't want to tell his story wrong, but so I'll paraphrase as best I can. COVID really scared him because he couldn't. He owns a jiu-jitsu school, and COVID really scared the shit out of him.
Down. They shut him down.
Yep. Yeah, so he ended up looking into law enforcement. I'm so happy that we hired him because he is one of the nicest human beings ever, and he's all of like 5'6" on a good day, and the sweetest guy in the world, and he's probably one of the most dangerous people in the world. So savage. Martial artists, yeah, martial artists are always so unassuming. But he's such a nice guy, and he's one example of many because all of our combatives instructors are fantastic. But he delivers the information so well in such a good, positive learning environment that if you had the courage to show up to one class, I guarantee you had a good time, you learned something, you had fun, and it was such a great learning environment that you just wanted to come back and you wanted to be part of the culture that they were trying to build. So, and I don't want this to in any way come off negative, but the culture and the environment that you're trying to build really does play a factor, because I've been in our training unit for, I think, going on a little over 3 years now. And our unit as a whole constantly gets feedback of, we love coming to training. We've never been motivated to want to come to in-service, but the way you guys are presenting the information and the way the environment you're creating, you're not yelling at us. You're not treating us like idiots. Like, we look forward to coming to in-service training now. And that's never been a thing. I've been here for 20 years is what some people say. And I was like, that's awesome for me to hear. But my brain starts diving into it a little bit. Like, why is that? And it's not something we actually thought about happening. It kind of happened just organically because we're passionate about what we do. And the round pegs fell into the round holes. So then that kind of goes back to what we said earlier. There's probably people at these agencies that have these skill sets that just aren't being utilized or taken advantage of. And not that I want people to be taken advantage of, but most good martial arts instructors probably really like to teach. And you give them the platform, and hey, I'll offer it twice a week. And on the back end, you find a way, give them an hour of overtime or something. Like, I guarantee you there's an easy solution to incentivize that, which again could be the catalyst to you get 30 more blue belts in your agency. And there you go. There's the spark of your culture, but you have to try. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. Like I keep saying. Sorry, I'm like a broken record right now.
No, it is the message, right? And this is a couple of things that came up for me there, and you're talking about this. You're talking about culture, and obviously, hot topic always needs to be a topic. You're in an institution that is steeped in tradition across the board. It's pretty rigid in terms of, kind of whatever they are, policies and procedures and uniforms and hierarchy, rank structure, and all that kind of stuff, and how things go up and down the chain of command. I'm only speaking from, my outside perception, kind of looking in, but no matter in what you described there, and particularly going back to what you're talking about when you were seeing the SWAT guys walk through the hallways or walk past you, you recognize that there's a club within a club, and people generally will gravitate to those things that want to be a part of them. And sometimes they got to be kind of pulled into it. They got to be, chided into it, shamed into it, encouraged into it, however the things you want to look at it. But if you give them an opportunity to say yes to something, and when they get there, they're invited in kind of with open arms, if you will, and then provided a great experience, they're going to want to come back. And again, going back to the SWAT thing, like that's a club within the club. And within that club, generally speaking, again, I don't know, I'm just a dude, but that seems to be a club that takes the things we're talking about pretty seriously.
Mhm.
And they understand the weight or the gravity of being fit or not being fit, or being skilled with your firearm or not being skilled with your firearm, communication, hands-on stuff, all of those kinds of things. And so it just perpetuates. Nobody has to tell them to do it, right? They just know that if they're in this club, this is what this club does.
Mhm.
And so going back to the academy is sort of like that too. Like, you're in this club because you signed up for it, and there's the extrinsic motivators, and you may not understand what the internal things are yet, but somewhere along the way you get it. Like, you're in the middle of it, and you're gonna have to accept it in some way or another, that there is this, again, there are these metrics that you have to meet, or tests that you have to pass. And then there's also, again, I mentioned the term social currency that starts to build and exist there. And again, you may not understand that as a newbie, right, coming in, of what's happening and what you're gaining from that, and how that's all put together. The instructors might, right, depending on the quality of the instructors and the quality of the program, and that's what they're trying to build. And so then when you go outside that, into on with your career, and then you look at these clubs within the club, that that's what they're perpetuating,
Mhm.
right? But they're not doing it based on a test. They're doing it based on the fact that they value these things because everybody else around me values these things, and I see the benefits of placing them at a high level of value. And it strikes me when I see, or I hear, or I find out that it took something awful to happen, right? Some incident, something to happen to finally motivate somebody to maybe even explore being part of this club, or not try to do it on their own, which is fine if if you're not a club type of person. But I don't see law enforcement as a place where you're going to have a very good time, you're going to be very successful, and you're going to thrive if you don't enjoy being part of that club, and all you're doing is taking or expecting the benefits or the things that you get from being a member of that club, wearing that badge, whatever the case is, without giving back. So
Mhm.
to your point about guys that want to give back, I believe, or officers that want to give back, I believe most officers do want that.
Mhm.
At least I want to believe that they want to contribute at some level, and that's probably why they got into the job. To your point, like,
Mhm.
there's the protect and serve thing. Like, what is our mission here, and how do I take care of myself, my personal responsibility, in order to be able to do that well? And then also, what am I providing to the team? And sometimes being a part of these clubs is that. So again, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, and I'll get off my pulpit about that. But my point of that being is those aren't hard things to do. And to make this point, like, to my knowledge, you don't have a set of bars on your collar when you go to work every day, right? You're not it doesn't say chief on the placard outside on your desk or your office. It didn't take that to be able to make the change. And so this conversation is much different in terms of, well, I don't know if it's different. I just know that I don't typically hear people talking about it, officers talking about it, the way I hear you talking about it. I hear a lot of negative, and a
Mhm.
lot I see and feel and hear a lot of finger pointing, and to an extent, a lot of excuses about why it can't be done, or why I can't get this done. Versus, again, like, at some level, somebody's going to have to say something, and somebody's going to step up, and it could be that person that you least expected that's going to do it. And
Mhm.
the other part that comes along with that is, just because they don't have a set of stripes, a couple bars, whatever the case is, like, they're immediately dismissed, because, like, what would you know? You're the
Yeah.
young cop, or whatever, or you don't have a black belt,
Mhm.
or you've not done the job that I have. You haven't even been on SWAT, man.
Mhm.
How would you even contribute here? That's a culture thing, right? And being accepting and listening to, and again, you mentioned, like, outsource or resourcing the people that you do have, that have talents and a passion for this, and giving them a platform to be able to do it. Uh, and again, you're in a spot, because you worked hard to get there, where you are given that platform, and it's paying off, not just for you, but for all the other people that you're working with. And I find that to be interesting, only because there's been such a, like, over the last few years, specifically in law enforcement, there, in, again, this is just my outside and the friends that I have and whatever else, like, there was a really awful period there where it got really weird. And I think it quieted people that maybe would have had a voice that found out real fast that it's probably better if I say nothing. It's probably better if I play this safe right now. And because I'll stay out of the limelight, I'll stay out of the spotlight, if you will. I'll not ruffle any feathers. That seems to be bad. But the results of that has been what we've gotten, which is leadership being promoted to levels that they probably shouldn't be at. They're not deserving, qualified or not. However, again, going back to objective versus subjective standards on how they got to that position. And now these officers that maybe were quiet or the ones that even weren't are going, well, that's exactly the point. And that's why this is never going to happen. And why we can't make change and why somebody else is in the way of making that change. It didn't take leadership to do that, right? To accomplish the things that you got accomplished. At some level, yes, getting approval for things takes, a sign off or, the swipe of a pen somewhere. But it just came from the inside. It came from the middle of the pack, the high performers, the high achievers that are in the middle of the pack that just want to do the job. And that's what I hear officers. I just want to do my job. Like I don't want to test for sergeant. I like being on patrol. I love this. I love my job. What else can you do? What else can you do to improve the situation?
So I'll say I've been, again, very blessed to have a lot of really good bosses that are great leaders. And when I come with an idea, they're like, okay. And they're not afraid to challenge back either. They're not just going to say no, but they're going to say, all right, here's what the next step is probably going to ask. And you don't have that answer yet. So go find that and come back to me in a week or something like that. Or I've also had bosses say, get out of my face and come talk to me next week. I don't have time for this shit.
Maybe they don't.
maybe they don't. Like, listen, I'm not afraid to get thrown out of the office. We can disagree and be friends. I'll come bother you in a week. Not a big deal. But there are some bosses who I'm not going to bring this to, who, like I said, I've been lucky that my career path, 90% or higher, has been working under good sergeants or good lieutenants, captains, and the way our chain of command works. So I hope it's like that for other people. I know it's not always sunshine and rainbows. If there's anything I've learned about being able to take or go to and teach cops in the shooting classes and stuff like that, and when you have little breaks while guys are loading mags and we're talking about random shit, every agency has their issues. No agency is immune to these types of problems. Now, they may be a little bit different here and there, but we've all got our problems. But because of the way local governments work, you're always going to have the person who's not a good leader, but they ended up in a leadership position. And they could be the roadblock, or you can, there's a way, the way the chain of command works is there's usually really wide at the bottom and it goes towards the top like a big tree, kind of like a Ponzi scheme, if you will. But at some point, there's another branch that you could probably either go to the side of or go around completely, and not in a disrespectful way to where you'll get in trouble. But if I get a no from one boss, what's to say I can't? I'm not like shopping for the answer to a different parent, but maybe in passing, like, hey, what do you think about this idea? And you can be open and honest, be like, hey, they didn't like this idea. What do you think about it? Oh, I love it. And next thing you know, it goes around. There's always a way. I promise you, if you're really motivated or you are passionate about the change you're trying to make, you'll find a way. Or guess what? All bosses eventually move on to other places. You'll get a new set of leadership in the next 12 months. Wait at 6 to 12 months. I promise you that boss who's a pain in the ass is probably somewhere else. Or you're under a different leadership because you moved somewhere else. There's a way. It's just how willing are you going to be to get, how many times do you want to get punched in the face with a no before you give up? Some people, it may be one or two. Some people like me, I'm pretty goddamn stubborn. Like, I get thrown out of an office every now and then and I'll just come back. Like, I'm not going to give up that easily. And some bosses probably hold it against me.
Couple things. First off is like coming to the table with a well-developed idea and a potential plan. Right? You don't have to have everything figured out, but don't just come with don't show up as the idea fairy. That would get really annoying to me, and it does. And I've got my own employees, and I've told them, don't bring me a problem without a solution. It doesn't have to be the right solution, but you better think through this, because otherwise, what are we doing here? Right? We're either wasting time, we're gossiping, and just talking about problems, or we're being productive. So think about one thing. The other thing that kind of came up for me when you were describing the tree and the way you explained that is, and going down a different branch, this may be the actual upside to having too many chiefs and maybe not enough Indians, right? That there are other people that you can go to. And then the last thing I think I heard you kind of say there is you got to be persistent, and you got to really believe in what you're doing. There has to be a strong why behind what you're doing in order to get you into that next office, to maybe get told to get out, or I can't help you, but you need to go talk to the next guy. Oh man, I got to go talk to another guy now. Like that's the process. Moving strictly into the fitness side of things, I asked you some pretty pointed questions up front, just about kind of like from a cultural perspective. We sort of touched on the objective stuff, and I brought up the point of we don't have to test people, right? Like to get them motivated, to get them to be a participant, to get them to value the things like BJJ, because BJJ is not only helping you with the physical skill in application for what you may have to do on your job, but it's also providing all the benefits of becoming fit, right? Of teaching or of giving you some grit, of giving you some mental fortitude, problem solving, losing, winning, understanding what achievement looks and feels like, suffering with your buddies, which is very valuable, right? Getting choked out by the small dude when you're the big dude, that kind of stuff. Those are all valuable lessons that teach. You can learn so many things in so many different ways, but you're being tested kind of daily, right? You're in each time you participate in that, same as if you walk into the weight room, right? Like you're effectively you're testing yourself, but not so that you can be tested for the standard that you have to meet. However, you mentioned data is important. And it's so interesting to me how easily the value gets lost when you start measuring, like, look, guys, the agencies that have great combatives programs tend to have less hurt officers. They tend to have less people hurt that they're actually having to apprehend, right? Like this stuff gets better. Yet somewhere it gets lost that, maybe we should do more of this, right? Maybe we should have this, and maybe we should provide them some resources. So solutions finding and a process for finding solutions on the fit side of things. There's a lot of things you have to get past. We already talked about a little bit of that, or a lot of that. But I wonder, again, based on experience, you kind of going back to your NC2A days, working with all different types of teams, just quickly overview like the variety of athletes, quote unquote athletes, as defined maybe by the school and on their scholarship or whatever else, but the variety of athletes that you worked with.
So the way it used to work when I was at UCF is Coach Ellis, if you were on the staff, you helped with football. So football was all hands on deck, because it's 100 plus athletes. So everybody got to work with football. I also got to do baseball and work with the pitchers, which was Coach Sinclair's thing. And then, Luke Day replaced Coach Sinclair. I worked with Luke for a couple years, and I think worked really well together at baseball. My other primary teams were track, cross country, and the cheerleading team, believe it or not. Okay. I actually loved working with them because they were some of the strongest people I've ever worked with. Like, these guys were stupid strong. It was throwing another human being up in the air the way they do, because me being the, curious person, like I went to their practices and like, all right, what is your movement patterns like? How do I find ways to maximize your abilities using the weights and stuff like that through explosive movements, et cetera, like we can talk about for days. And I was blown away at the skill level that these guys had. And they were always so motivated. I could literally say, all right, let's pick up cinder blocks and go run stadiums. And they're like, okay. And they'd have a smile on their face the entire way and probably be half dead afterwards and wouldn't bat an eye. So they're actually probably one of my favorite teams to work with. Football was always fun because they were great athletes, but not everybody had the great mindset of they thought talent would get them pretty far. And I was like, dude, you can find a million talented people who didn't do anything with their like careers. So finding ways to motivate them was always a little different and more challenging. And then baseball got me more into psychology than anything else because, although baseball is not an individual sport, the pitchers have a lot of sports psychology going on in their heads. Same thing with like golfers, pro fighters, tennis players, stuff like that, race car drivers. Like the sports psychology has always been an interesting factor for me in psychology in general. Like I said earlier, like the way their brains work is very interesting to me. So not only was it fun to again coach everybody as far as like here's how to do the movements and do the workouts, et cetera, but how do you be a coach as well to keep their minds right? Because sometimes you're also the middleman between their coach of whether it's a head baseball coach or their pitching coach or their position coach. And sometimes the weight room is their little escape from that. I'll proudly say it now. I loved working with our pitchers because at the time I was at UCF, I won't name the coach's name, but the coach was not a bad guy, but I think very ill-informed to where they would be top 25 every year, but about 2/3 of the way through the year, they would burn out because the coach
falling apart.
Taking them on 6 a.m. runs for 3 to 5 miles because the coach loved running and he thought it was a great idea. I was like, we told him so many times, like, you're burning these kids out. So it got to a certain point where if coach didn't come to the weight room with them, I was like, hey, grab some elastic bands, grab some foam rollers, chill the fuck out, work on your recovery a little bit for 30 or 40 minutes, then go sit in the hot tub or the cold tub. I don't give a shit. Like, we're not lifting weights today. Like, you guys are burned the fuck out. I can see it in their body language straight up. Like, they're exhausted. They're going to crack. And that was the only thing I could do to like try to help them. Sometimes I saw the better result in the games they would play the following week that it made a difference. But it was always so interesting to see little things like that, like at a Division I level too. So I'm blessed to have those experiences because that 5 years of my life, I learned a lot about just human beings in general, and not just like the workout stuff, but just psychology, coaching, mentoring, communicating with all different types of people, and the way that you need to like have conversations and educate. It truly changed, I think, my career path for the better.
Man, the reason I wanted to have you walk through that was because of all the things that you covered. And I kind of knew you would touch on some of those things so I don't have to ask follow-up questions because you covered so many things. And I think when you're talking about implementing programming into an institution or into a team, in the cases that you were talking about, there's a few things that pop up for me there. And one is there's never a one-size-fits-all. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in institutional law enforcement, it tends to be like that. Like, oh, this is the answer. Everybody needs to do this thing now, whether that's a policy, a procedure, something like even a piece of equipment. Everybody needs to carry this piece of equipment. Well, maybe that's not the best idea. Like maybe there's considerations here. And then on the fitness side of things, obviously you have different athletes coming into it at different levels with different needs. And one of the things I heard you talk about there was you're basically doing like a task analysis. Like, what exactly do these people do? What do they need? What's important? And how can I have the biggest impact on them for all of those things with the time I have to spend with them, which is generally very limited. With all the other things they have to do. In that case, they're student athletes. They have to go to school. They have travel. They have to travel. They have games. They have practices. They have a life, right? It's not indifferent to a law enforcement officer. So, if you're trying to select a program, from somebody, whatever that happens to be, and you're trying to implement it into the whole, you can expect that that's going to be very unsuccessful. It's just not going to work. Yeah. You just outlined that. You can't do that with everybody because you have all these very different ends of the spectrum and then everybody in the middle. And so in implementing programs, you have to have a strong understanding of that. And then obviously all the things that you mentioned there about psychology, motivation, recovery. I mean, there's so many things you mentioned. I don't want to hash them all, but when you're implementing a program, that needs to be the foundation for how you're putting something together, right? And it's different. Again, fitness gets so oversimplified and at the same time so overcomplicated for so many reasons. And I think that's where people kind of get lost in it. And while there's some complexity to all of it, it doesn't have to be complicated. So I wonder about, like, if we had to walk through, like, how would you, let's say you had resources and not the world, not a blank checkbook, but the resources where you had a facility, you have 200 officers, as in your case, about 200 officers, and you were trying to give them some resources beyond just the facility. Because putting them in the facility or giving them a facility that's open to them and then giving them the time to work out there, that's part of it, right? But then there's like, now what do I do? How do I educate them? How do I keep them moving in the right direction? Do we give them goals? If we give them goals, what are they? I'm not saying tests. I'm saying, how do we evaluate kind of where they are, all the different groups, if you will, subcategories, and how do you give them pathways to go about doing that? And then what do we tell them they should be doing? That's a big undertaking, but there are people out there like yourself that understand all that stuff. There's probably people at a lot of agencies that do understand that at a higher level. And then there's obviously people on the outside that could come in and consult and help you with that stuff too. So you're looking at like fitness standards. The standard should be, you need to be fit. You need to work out. Like, you need to take care of yourself, right? If not for the job, for the rest of your, just for your life, right? And doing all the things that you do. But I guess the very specific question is how would you start that with an agency in terms of pulling a program together, at least the beginning stages of a program together, to get people going? And maybe we talk about the carrot and the stick piece. I don't know. I think that's less of it. I think it's more like, what could this look like? How would you provide programming and the right kind of programming to support a law enforcement officer wherever they are in their career, wherever they're coming to this with their health, fitness history, background, passion or no passion, all that kind of stuff. Like, what are some basic, like, mainstay foundational things you need to do?
So something that just kind of jumped into my head when you were talking about like fitness standards, you're right. The fitness industry and everything, it's full of a lot of nonsense, and it's hard to filter through. So if I had to push or recommend a way to push, is maybe don't even call it fitness, but capability. What are you capable of? Are you capable of doing whatever the standard is? If you want to create a standard and enforce it, good luck. Like, it's probably not going to happen. But as far as resources and how to get something up off the ground, the recommendation I would probably go to, as far as beyond, again, facilities and time, is going to be, there's world-class strength coaches, and like yourself, Jeff Nichols, Matt Winning, Dave Tate, like all these power lifters, like not only are they world-class like power lifters, but they just, like, Matt Winning has, I think, I'm pretty sure he's got his PhD in like biomechanics and sports science at this point. Like, he knows a lot about how the body functions in general. You've got functional nutritionists that are all over the internet. There's never been I don't know if we talked about this in the other podcast, but there's so much information at our fingertips. Like, I'm looking at my laptop, I can pull up Google, and just by Googling a functional nutritionist, I guarantee we'll find 10 that will solve that problem, or strength coaches in my area, and I'll find something. So the reason, and being able to filter those resources is the issue. There's a little bit of risk involved because you don't know these people. And if I'm a novice and I didn't have my background, I'm not going to be able to filter through somebody's sales pitch BS of selling me like oceanfront property in Arizona type of shit. So that's definitely going to be a problem. But if you start doing your homework and reaching out to the people in your agency, send out an agency-wide email. Hey, does anybody have a background in physical fitness coaching? You're probably going to have one. Somebody knows somebody who could have a conversation with you for 10 or 15 minutes or is willing to help. Or I guarantee you, because I know the type of person you are, somebody dropped in your DMs and said, hey, I want to do this. Is there any recommendations that you could provide? Like Scott at Ironsight is probably going to have some type of resource to offer. Jeff Nichols sliding into his DMs. Like there's so many resources that you can reach out to that will, if not give you the answer, help guide you towards the answer in some way. Or there's a lot of organizations, not that I love any of them specifically, but there's a lot of personal training organizations that a lot of agencies have education programs. I know for a fact, some out in California, I want to say it's $5,000 to $10,000 a year. Anything you want. You want to go to underwater basket weaving? Go ahead. Go to class. They reimburse you in your paycheck. I think it's Orange County or
it's Orange County. It's Orange County.
There you go. So, okay, you want to something you're passionate about? I'll go get my CSCS certification. I'll go take the TSAC or whatever it's called, the tactical version, because it just sounds cooler, even though I think it's kind of silly.
Sorry. I'm with you on that.
But there's definitely resources, and even if you don't know where to look, common sense will probably lead you to something. Now, how do you start implementing it is a very probably deep rabbit hole. But the first thing I would do, if it were me personally in that situation, is, hey, I'm going to offer myself. Yes, I may be a novice, but I might be able to help you. Well, do you want to trust me with your wellness? It's up to you. But hey, I'm going to come in early on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at these times. If you'd like to work out and get some coaching, hey, that's how it starts. And next thing you know, maybe a boss who is a lieutenant captain or whatever wants to actually participate. And again, you're starting the catalyst. If nobody shows up, like we talked about with other resources that have been offered to law enforcement, no one shows up. Hey, you tried. Readjust, change course, find another way. I guarantee you there is a way, but people don't want to get the roadblock and then find another way. Most of them hit the roadblock and they're like, oh, fuck it. I guess it's not meant to be. Like, no, there is a way. I promise you. If you're passionate enough, you'll get there. It may take 3, 5+ years, but how dedicated do you want to be to solving that problem?
Yeah, I love this. I love this conversation because there's things that are coming up for me too. And you're just going back to kind of like your 50%. So there's 50% of people you don't have to even talk to, right? Because they're already doing this. So like, who needs the help? And I think if you talk to the 50% that is already doing it, believes they're doing it well, regardless of whether they are or they're not, because that's subjective and relative. The point of this is they're already doing it. Who are the people that need the help? I would focus on them first. That's just my personal opinion. Like, we have, in your case, let's say there's 50% of the people that either don't value it, are afraid to do it, know they're out of shape, but want to be in shape, or and aren't sure how to get there, and are fearful potentially of that other 50% discounting what they're doing to try to come up to speed. And that's again, going back to culture, like having somebody like, again, going back to being dismissive, right? And or discounting somebody for the things that they are doing. Like, who's to say that what this person is doing, albeit it may be much less than what you're doing, they're way less capable of you than you are, if they're being discouraged, right? By extrinsically, by people that are in shape and pushing themselves, like that's going to be a barrier of resistance. And so if they're at least met with, look, dude, we have these resources for you. Again, you're the guy. I'm showing up. I'm going to be here. We can, let's do this thing together kind of thing. Again, that's a little bit idealistic, but more specifically, giving them a pathway. Like, how capable are you? Well, let's do an assessment, right? Like, and that could be done on your own, like in the privacy of your own gym that you have a membership at, or in your garage or whatever else, to at least understand where a starting point for you is. And then we can provide you with some education, some direction on like a fundamental or foundational type program to help get you back on track. So this has been my experience in nearly 30 years of this business, which is once people start to achieve a little bit of success and they get through the bumpy road that inevitably exists for everybody when they start, and everybody can relate to that, back to taking some time. If you're one of those 50% that is super on top of it, you took time off, you got injured, you got hurt, or you just got lazy, or whatever else, jumping back in sucks. Sucks. It impacts your emotional status, your physical status, and your psychological status. But if you gave them a pathway to gain some success and at least achieve something, and you put it out there in front of them and go, hey, here's where you are, and let's get you down this pathway, and you will very quickly see, how that change or how the effort that you're putting in can impact you. And you're starting to bring more people. You're going from 50% into 51% of the people that are actually using this stuff, and you just tick it up 1% at a time. And it doesn't have to start with a physical standard, because I think we're agreed on this. Like, that's probably not going to happen very soon.
No.
There's not going to be an agreed upon standard. And that's part of the overcomplication of this process by people's like, oh, well, it has to be this, with very little rationale as to why. And again, they get lost in the weeds. And then all of a sudden, what you've done is you've separated out, like, well, there's people who are probably never going to meet that right now, like, or not for a long time. And if they even get one hint of that in their own head that they're not going to meet that, well, then they're never going to start. So having some type of I'll just call it what it is, like a beginner or a re-beginner type of entry point for people to get into and have that available for them, I think is a great place to start for people. Concentrate on the people that need the most help right now, and encourage the people that don't need the most help to encourage them in some way, right? Don't be a dick as a starter, right? Just, look, these people are trying. They're probably going to fall down a few times. They're probably going to fail, but please don't help that to happen, right? Like, let's kind of move them in the right direction. Again, I see all the time, like all the time, officers are very public about, like, that fat cop, this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, okay, right. They're agreed. Fat cop, out of shape, not squared away, not taking care of business. Okay. Going back to the other things you're talking about, there's psychology there. There's a lot of things there. There's underlying things that exist there. But having some resources for somebody to kind of get started, I think, is important, because we did at one point. The other thing I would say is one of the agencies I'm familiar with actually runs a pre-academy, and the fitness aspect is a very large part of the pre-academy. So in the entry process, you're going through a pre-academy before you go to the academy, and within that pre-academy, they start the education on this, and they start the introduction to the experiences to help build value, but also a deeper level understanding of why they're doing what they're doing and how it plays into all the other things that they're doing. And so, I'm not saying like every agency has to do a pre-academy and that's the answer, but some type of like a pre a pre-entry point to this new physical fitness program, and having somebody take the lead on it. Somebody has to champion this thing, to invite people in and understand that, yeah, people are going to probably be resistant to it because they know they're fat and out of shape, if, for lack of a better word. And so what are the things they need to know? And I guarantee you didn't learn that as the, what's the term I've heard? Like, PFIs, physical fitness instructors that went through the 40-hour post program, which I'm pretty sure, and I may have had a look at that or not in a couple of places. It's garbage. It sucks, right? However, that guy, whoever took that PFI, went through that PFI course, wanted to get there for a reason. They probably just didn't learn the things they needed to go, but they are a resource and they have some information. They need better direction. Maybe grab those champions out, because every department, I think, has one of those people. Like, those are the people that work in the academy, right? And do the physical fitness stuff. And they could be resourced, right? They're already getting paid, right? They could be resourced to do a little bit more work or have an adjunct duty, which could be part of this process. Again, people could listen to this, go, dude, you're so out of touch. You are so out of touch, that'll never work. Well, have you ever fucking tried it? And because I don't know, again, outside of the one department I just mentioned, I don't know anybody that actually is. So, like, where are we meeting these folks that are not meeting whatever the standard is, subjective or objective standard, in terms of what you said, which is capability, and how do you define that, which is, again, another rabbit hole. What are we doing to set them up for success? Instead of bitching about it, what are we doing? And you're right, man. I'll go back to what I said. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had, and I've been taken up on those offers and offers that I've provided out there. I would do it for free. I have a fucking facility. It is less than 5 minutes from some of these department headquarters. Like, just come here, right? Just come here. Like, You come when you want. We'll have something available for you. I'll provide programming if that's what you want. But it isn't about a program, right? Like a
Exactly.
template. It's not a template. It's never going to be a template. So you got to get that out of your head. It's not going to be hit factor scoring, man. Like it just isn't. It has to, there's individuals that have individual things here. It can't be boiled down to and oversimplified, going back to the overcomplicated versus oversimplified. Like you can't oversimplify it like that. And more than that, if you go into this with some expectation that everybody's going to come out of here a raging success, and that if I start this 3-month program, at the end, you know, the 50 people that I put in this program are going to have these awesome results. Stop it. Because it doesn't work like that. I mean, you mentioned like the combatives thing. Like it took time to get this thing going, and you have to be committed to putting in that time. Again, particularly on the fitness end of things, you're talking not just fitness. You go back to your title, you know, and what there probably is on your placard or somewhere, wellness, right? If you have to focus on the wellness of somebody and getting them to feel better, right? And a lot of these guys don't even know what that feels like. They have no fucking idea what that feels like.
I love that you brought that up.
So again, like they don't know what healthy and fit actually feels like. And so if you think that putting a program in front of them and giving them some hours to a week to potentially get that accomplished with no concept of what that is, dude, you're out of touch. You're completely out of touch, whether you're in leadership or you're in the middle and you're bitching about it, right? Whether you're that fit guy who has had some success somewhere or whatever, that fit officer who's had some success and you put in the work. Like I get that, but you are not them. So it's again, that's just kind of, it's sort of a plea. I sound like a babbling idiot probably right now. Again, with my idealism, but I've had some experience with this, and police departments don't do this. So you need to be outsourcing. You need to be resourcing people that do this shit and understand these things. And I would say this on the same time, as you're onboarding new people, you can also double down. You're onboarding new people into whatever this program is from like an outside resource. You could double down and be training and educating and developing the people that are on the inside to be able to perpetuate this thing. Because ultimately, that's what everybody wants anyways. From what I heard you say is like, look, we can generate this from the inside. It doesn't have to come from the outside, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And I love that the way you worded that, because it wasn't that long ago where I was having a conversation with a buddy, and most people think that the way they feel at their current state is normal. And they don't even realize like, oh, I could have more energy and more mental clarity and feel 10 times better than I really feel. But I'm in this rut that I've accepted as this is how my body feels. And there's not going to be anything better. They don't know what an optimal level feels like because they've never experienced it. So I love that you brought that up. I'll say this as well. I'm very guilty of task saturating myself. And if there are officers that are listening to this and they're like, I don't have the time or ability, I get it. Trust me. My wife, God bless her, she puts up with a lot of my silly shit. And I come home and I'm like, God damn it. I'm not making progress the way I want to, and I'll be frustrated. She tries to convince me to like care less, and I don't know how to do that yet. But there'll be the good days and bad days. There will be wins and losses. Like you'll get a little bit of momentum, and then 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or sometimes 1 step back and 5 steps forward. It works both ways. But you have to. You're not going to play a David Goggins fucking podcast and motivate somebody who's never done shit to magically want to go run 100 fucking miles. It's not how it works. But you have to find ways to make little victories. And if, like you just said, if you get from 50% to 51%, if you get from 0% to 0.5%, it's something.
Right.
You have to take the little baby step wins and do it the right way. And that is how you end up building a small culture of moving in the right direction, regardless of what the topic is. Like I said, I can give several because they've been in the works for a long time at my agency, and I see the positive outcome they've had. I know there's agencies that are struggling with these same things. The blueprint may not be the same, But if the motivation is properly placed in who is ever trying to make the change, there is a way. I promise you. You just have to be so stubborn to the point where you keep running your head into the wall. Eventually, you'll break through that wall, or you'll go around the wall. You'll go over the wall. There is a way. Mm-hmm. Please don't just stop. I beg everybody who cares about this shit, don't stop. Be a respectful, annoying pain in the ass at the same time and find a way to do it. And if there's anything I can do to help, even like throw me a DM, ask for whatever, I'll do my best. I know you'll offer the same, even though, like I said, very few people take us up on this stuff. And by no means am I an expert, but I'll help you any way I can. So I'll be one of those resources, hopefully, to you. Find a way to motivate your people. Find a way to incentivize it. There's low-hanging fruit everywhere. There's a million examples that we talked about before in the other podcast, whether it's an extra day off for passing a capability or fitness test, or the on-duty stuff. Get your FOPs, like I said, they're good and bad. Get your union involved. I guarantee you, you pay dues to a union, and it's not just for them to go on fucking convention golf tournaments. Like, hey, sponsor a health run or a competition or something, a fitness fair. Hey, hire a nutritionist to come and do consultations at the agency for a day. Your FOP dues are paying for some shit. Like, ask for that stuff. Like, I guarantee you, hey, a nutritionist paying $500 for an afternoon, they'll come to briefing and do 20-minute consultations and teach you how to eat better. And then guess what? You'll start eating better and you'll feel like, oh, I don't feel like shit today. Oh, maybe that's what optimal feels like. And then that might be the little breadcrumb that leads to, oh, maybe I'll start going for a walk or a little bit more. I'll do a little run. I'll do some weights. I'll do some push-ups. You never know, but you got to try. Like, it's hard for me to say it over and over again because I know it sounds like a broken record, but I promise eventually you will win. You have to keep going.
So that's, you are an example of that. The agency is an example of that to a certain extent. And in terms of that term winning, like, I think it needs to be well understood that, I guess the question is, like, what does winning look like? And that needs to be well understood before you start expecting to have some outcome from something that you did. Yeah. Right. And so it needs to be process driven. And what I just heard you say is this process has taken years, and it's taken a lot of persistence, a lot of reps, just like getting fit, just like getting better on the range, just like passing a class or whatever, and learning the things it takes a lot of reps. And so defining what winning looks like, understand that winning doesn't look the same for everybody all the time, accepting that and trying to find what can we count as wins versus whether it's a pass or a fail on the test, and what do we value there in terms of winning? And then going back to the process versus outcome driven focus. And that is, like, what are the things we need to put into place to start getting some wins? Because I'll go back to the club thing, the club within the club. Like, once you start winning a little bit, that shit's contagious, right? And people will latch onto that because they want to be a winner. Like, most people want to be a winner. I know it appears a lot of times they don't want that. They want a participation trophy. They want to stay safe. They want to stay comfortable. True. Until everybody else around them is winning, right? And then there's that social pressure to be a winner. And again, going back to not knowing what healthy feels like, when you start to feel what winning actually feels like that's something that sticks with you, and you understand what a win and a loss feels like, and you're able to deal with the wins and the losses better, right? So again, going back to like the whole fitness concept, it is a concept, but it's paramount. We've already established that, and again, from all the shit that I read on the internet and all the things that come across my DMs and all the things that happen on podcasts, and at least what the world, both the public, what public is saying, what the institution is saying, is that fitness is valuable, but it's only valuable sometimes, right? It needs to be valuable all the time. And unless we're propping it up that way, it's going to get lost. So going back to like equipment acquisition, like you were just talking about the rifles and the suppressors that you got or whatever, people are listening to that like, that's a fucking win. Like, I would like to have that too. Well, that didn't just happen because you wished it, or you had one conversation, right? There was a long process there. That process is going to be different for everybody, but the fundamentals of working through a process don't change, and it starts with having conversations, talking to people, outreaching, probing people. Start with the people that you know, start with the people that you trust that are into it. You'll get a good sense of, maybe, again, to your point, like when you're looking for resources, you'll get a good sense of the direction you need to start moving. You just need to be committed to moving that direction. And that's the same for the person that's out of shape, that is afraid to get into shape because of the failure that is inevitably going to exist in that process. Like, you have got to be committed to it. So, and that's my soapbox speech for getting our officers in shape and having our agency support them in doing that. I'm hugely passionate about it, man. I know you are too. It's why I wanted to talk to you. I'm hoping some of this reaches somewhere, and somebody, and encourages them to do what, the things that you're imploring them to do. And you already put yourself out there, like, dude, well, if you need help, like if you need to talk, bounce an idea off, or you need some direction, like, just hit me.
Yeah.
It's always been a two-way street with you. I really appreciate that. I'll say the same. Like, I don't know everything. I never try to put on that I do. I try not to be a know-it-all, but I know a few things because I've seen a few things, and I want to provide value, and that might not be coming from me. It might be me, like you did for me, connecting you with somebody else that can help you through your process, whatever that is. This is going to be an ongoing, like, discussion for a long time, and I've kind of committed myself to the process of having those discussions. And dude, I just want to really thank you for helping me with that process yet again, for the third time. It's been valuable for me. I appreciate it.
It's truly my pleasure. I always enjoy chatting with you. I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. And I'm glad you're doing this. Like I said, this is podcasts like this and conversations like this, again, have so much reach and potential that I see so much benefit of it. Like 10 years ago, I never even knew what the hell podcast was. And now, like, there's so much good information out there through resources like yourself. And I'm so proud of everything that you've accomplished and the message that you're putting out there. So keep up the good work, man. I really, really appreciate the work you do.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Thank you. I appreciate that. I can't wait to see you too, man. It'll be a good time. It's been too long. We'll get to see all our friends here pretty soon, here in January at the you know where. And that said, like, again, just kind of putting myself out there. I don't have all the answers, but I know a lot of good dudes. I know a lot of good people that are super smart, that have been super successful, like Chris. Don't hesitate to reach out. We can put you in touch with other people. If you see me, out and about, stop me. I'm always happy to have a conversation about being productive and doing good things. I hope that by having this conversation as a dude from the outside, it's not dismissed, but rather, it's encouraged, because I don't hear the public talking about and valuing officer fitness and health and wellness. I just don't. I don't see it at all. And it may be happening in other places, in other in an institution somewhere, but I just don't hear it talked about enough. So if you do have a platform, get guys like Chris on your show to be talking about this stuff, and just, instead of beating the dead horse of fitness sucks in law enforcement, like, I've heard it a million times. Like, change the fucking conversation, man. There's different conversations to be had. Hopefully, this has been a good example of that for people out there. So, they're risking overdoing it. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you. Can't wait to see you soon, man. And good luck. Be safe out there, man.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me.